Okay, so those will all be ways that you can help to refine your question a little bit. And then finally, and this is actually, I think, really important to think about, you can actually develop questions through the communities that you want to study and that you want to work with. In the past, social scientists often just went someplace and said, hey, I want to do research on you, and they handed them a survey, or they asked them some interview questions. And then they went off and they went back to their office and they typed up the results of that research and published it, and maybe the people in the community never knew what happened with that. Or maybe they actually did some things that harmed the community in some way because they published a story that damaged the reputation of that community, or had some hard feelings or something like that. So increasingly, a really important part of social science research is involving community partners in the development of the research questions and methods. Okay? So this is another way you can develop your question, is by talking with community members, and the term we use for this is community participatory research or community-based research. And if you Google either of those terms, you'll see tons of resources online. There's been lots of books and articles that have been published about those topics as well. So if it turns out that you know, and I think part of an AMS application is having some contacts already, right? You've got to develop some contacts if you want to go somewhere, right? So you can't just say, I'm going to go there and show up. You have to have some people you know on the ground that you're going to help you out when you're there, right? So one of the things you can ask them is, what kinds of things would be useful to you to know about in your community? And you can use that information to help develop those research questions too. Okay? So those are all ways that we can get some help of starting off this broad topic where we're not really sure exactly what we want to do, except we know we want to go to some place, or we want to visit some institution or organization, but we don't know what we want to do when we get there. This helps us to be more focused about that. Okay? Everybody with me so far? Yeah, we're not quite to push-up time yet, but we might be getting close already. Okay, so here's some examples. These are just a few students who I've worked with over the past few years who've done successful AMS projects, and have more or less gone through this same thing, where they came to me and said, Henke, I want to go to Africa, in the case of two of them, like Kenley and Danny, or I want to go to Honduras, like Kelsey, who went last year. But they're not exactly sure what to do when they get there. Danny and Kelsey, both coming from a natural science background. Kelsey, I think, is biochem. Danny's physics. Kenley, I can't remember what his background was, but he wasn't from the social sciences. He might have been an econ guy, I can't remember. But anyway, each of them kind of trying to figure out what to do. They're interested, like in the case of Kenley, traditional medicine in Ghana. Kelsey wanted to go study these lobster divers in Honduras. You probably have maybe heard about her research already because it's on the website. And there's actually a nice profile of her research working with these lobster divers who have to dive down without any equipment, and they get a case of the bends, and it oftentimes leads to these really severe health problems for them. And then Danny, who just actually not long ago, really just a few weeks ago, or a couple months ago, was in South Africa working in this project on leopard conservation with this particular community organization that works to conserve leopards, and interested in how do they do that, how do they relate with the community, and especially people who might not like leopards that much because they eat their sheep and goats and stuff like that. So each of them basically trying to figure out, how do I actually turn that interest? They've got a location, they've got an interest in what's there, but how do they actually do research on it? Those are some of the projects where I kind of try to work with those students to develop them into a more specific question. So how do we do that? If a research question isn't about an interest, really, it's not about a place, it's not about a topic, what is it about? You guys know because you have the PowerPoint slides in front of you, right? You know what's coming next. So it's not a mystery. It's about variables. Social science research questions, the thing that makes them science is that they're about variables, things that we can measure and analyze. That's why social science is a science, because we actually have things that we can measure and analyze, interpret, and write about. Okay, so really narrowing down your research question is about identifying the variables that are either explicit or implicit in your interest, and refining those and thinking about how you can study them. Okay, So basically what we're doing is variable analysis then. And in its most fundamental form, it's just about the relationship between two key variables. You probably learned about this in high school science class, right? The independent and the dependent variable. In this case, the independent variable is x, the dependent variable is y, and we're presuming that there's sort of testing for whether there's some relationship between them. A lot of science is based on that, right? What happens if x goes up? Does y go up too? Or does it go down? Or is there any association at all between x and y? Most fundamentally, that's what our questions are about, and when we're trying to refine them and figure out what we really want to study, that's kind of what we're trying to figure out, is what are the variables that are part of our research question. Okay? So basically a variable is kind of like a box. And it's a box that can hold different types of properties about something. Okay? So one variable that we've got in this room right now is temperature, right? It can go up, it can go down, but it's something that we can measure and we can feel, and we can use it to make predictions, right? If I know that the temperature is at a certain level, that's going to make you guys sleepy and you have to do push-ups, basically, right? So there's all kinds of things that we can relate to these variables, and same thing with social science. There's all kinds of ways in which groups of people, or people themselves as individuals, organizations, institutions, locations, and regions have these variables associated with them that we can measure and that we can turn into research questions about the relationship, most simply between x and y, but it can get way more complicated than that. We have all kinds of variables in a multivariate analysis where we want to see what kinds of relationships are there. So basically, those variables that are our building blocks, that's why we're starting there. That's our starting point. We want to know what they are, and from there we can answer a lot of the other questions, fill in a lot of the other blanks about our research projects. So one thing to remember, or one thing to, I guess, emphasize, is that we actually have two types of main research that we do in a social science approach. One is quantitative, and that's the one that's the most likely to be using this kind of language about variables and relationship between x and y. Quantitative, as the name implies, is about quantities or about numbers. So anything that we can quantify and measure, and especially do kind of statistical analysis, is a quantitative type of project. And qualitative is basically everything else. Everything else that we can't really as easily put into numbers, and we want to use it more for kind of understanding nuances and processes that are hard to put into numbers. We'll see some examples of that, especially when we're looking at interviews and observational studies. So basically, quantitative methods where we're making things into numbers are better for when we want to have a large breadth of information, maybe about a large population of people. We want to know something about all of Hamilton, or all of New York, or all of the United States. We would want to get numbers for that so we can make generalizations about that population. Like the average age of people in Hamilton is whatever it is, right? So we can actually learn something about a whole big population by putting it in a number that way. Qualitative tends to be better for getting at depth rather than breadth. So we can kind of dig a little deeper down in some cases, and especially if you want to understand social processes, which a lot of social life is about things that happen over time and that develop over time. Sometimes qualitative is a little bit better at seeing those, although those are themselves kind of generalizations. Questions so far? Anything? Okay, everybody with me? Yeah? Like I said, we're going to go fast. Examples of variables in the social sciences. Well, there's millions of them, or I mean there's a lot of them. This is just a small list of ones that I made up off the top of my head for this slide, but I categorized them in a couple different ways. The ones that probably come to mind the most easily for us in the social sciences are in the first column, demographic variables. These are basically properties about a person that they maybe don't have a lot of control over, right? Your age, your gender, your race or ethnicity. Those aren't really things that you choose, right? So that these kind of specific aspects about who you are or a group of people are that we can measure, and not really a variable, right? Gender can be male or female if we think about it in the simplest terms. Age goes from 0 up to whatever, 120, something like that.